What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So in this video, I did want to talk about why I think Motorfest should have gotten at least one more year in development. Now, this is probably going to be a pretty fair statement because I feel like a lot of people at this point are like, yeah, Blocked, you know what? Maybe you're right, dude. Maybe I think this game would have been way better if it did get one more year. But here's the thing, though. What would have actually happened if it did actually have one more year in development compared to actually releasing around September of last year instead of coming out of September of this year, or at least maybe around November or something if they pushed it back a bit. But here's the thing about this, though. We all do know the Crew 2 obviously had some updates planned while Motorfest was being teased and stuff. So I would say one thing back then, why not actually have the Crew 2 get a few more updates on top of the other ones, which I think back then were the Mad updates or whatever they were called, which I have to admit were actually kind of dope. We had new cars and skills and stuff like that, but why not actually release a few more updates and then most likely have Motorfest come out one more year later instead of releasing while the Crew 2 was still getting promoted on top of Motorfest trying to be teased and also then promoted, which honestly did not make that much sense to me how they did that. But I just feel like, though, imagine for a second if Motorfest came out this year instead of last year. But let's take a deeper dive into this. Now, if we did actually get Motorfest in the year of 2024, this game would have every single playlist it has right now, but it would then come out with it on release. On top of that, we'd also then get the entire map expansion in the game already that would most likely release with it. Would you guys actually like to see that on top of the game already being in there? And then next year we'd actually get another map expansion, which would then be the third one on top of the one that was already added, or at least you know that is coming. But what if the game actually had the map expansion already in it? So we had Maui and Oahu in the game itself when it came out. Like, that would have been insane, and it would have most likely marketed a lot better because, you know, you have two islands full of stuff, all kinds of events. We obviously have all the playlists in there. We also then would have ended up having more events being mixed onto both islands with the playlist going to like one island to another. And then we also could have got a bunch of different grand race type of things instead of like one, which a lot of people are obviously still asking for more PvP events. But if they actually had two islands in the game on release, they could have had an actual PvP system where that was going to be ranked or all kinds of other stuff with the actual grand race besides just one game mode. Maybe the Demolition Royale could have been upgraded a bit or changed in a certain way. On top of that, guys, we could have had the entire summits overhauled, being on both maps, but also like a different design compared to the Crew 2. I do know a lot of players were actually playing the Crew 2 at the time, and so was I then. Really did love that game. I feel like it was actually thriving too. Does anybody else feel like the Crew 2 is not in a bad area whatsoever? I mean, we obviously had a bunch of players, record number counts of people being on it. I mean, for example, on just PlayStation, the summits had around like 80 to over 100,000 people on just PlayStation, bro. A lot of players might go, well, Block, like that's a similar number. And in some ways, yes, like it almost has 100,000 people in the summit, sure. The difference, though, is that's across every single platform. We have PlayStation 4, PS5, we have PC, we have both Xboxes. That's going to be 90,000 people around every single platform, whereas the Crew 2 had around 80 to 100,000 on just the PlayStation side of it. I feel like right there is going to be a big difference in a player count. I feel like the Crew 2 was doing great, so why not have that game be out for like one more year, keep updating it, and then have everything in Motorfest when it comes out. What I mean by that is have every single car in it, like not doing the crazy like collection import over the course of like 3 different times of Motorfest being out. And the way they could have did this, though, is maybe they could have actually had Motorfest come out with every single car that was in the Crew 2. You guys remember like that entire like overseas thing to where you had to go there? They had like a little teaser and stuff like that at the docks. Imagine having that toward the end of the Crew 2's life. Every single car was in there. They could have teased some of the cars that were going to be in Motorfest on top of some of the containers. For example, the Supra. They could have had like the Bugatti Bolide or something in there. They could have had some other cars people love like the NSX and stuff like that. That would have been dope. And that way players would have been like, bro, this game is going to be insane. It's going to be a great way to really like say, okay, goodbye the Crew 2. Let's get into the next game of the new Crew franchise. That probably would have made a lot more sense, man. But instead, though, we actually ended up getting Motorfest releasing a tad too early, at least I would say in my opinion. Then again, I feel like a lot of players are like, nah bro, this game definitely needed more time. For example, right now I did mention that other video, we have bugs in the playlist that definitely shouldn't be there, and I really do feel like the game should have released with a lot more PvP content, and also a lot more endgame content for that matter, like more challenges you can do. Instead, all we currently have is the entire lovely timeline challenges that are made in the main stage itself, which I feel like a lot of players don't even enjoy doing them. I would also say, guys, I don't know how people feel about this, but if they did actually wait another year on this game, that entire main stage design most likely should have been completely different. My goodness. I just feel like a lot of players look at that and go, okay, so I'm going to get a few titles, I get a few upgrades like a car, maybe some clothing and stuff like that to level 5, and then ever since level 5 to like level 100, I get a couple of titles. There is nothing else in there. Maybe if they actually waited a bit and most likely went through it, they could have had a lot more stuff in the said timeline every time a season came out, which I would say would have been so much better. And the other thing I wanted to talk about in this though was going to be some features in the Crew 2 that were not in Motorfest when it came out. And to be honest, a lot of that made no sense to me, bro. A few examples of this. Number one here, we obviously have the parts in the Crew 2 that actually show you exactly which parts that you have on it. For example, you have something like a lovely chemist set or even like a loot digger. Why was that not in the Crew 2? That would have been so much better to have that in there. Another feature we had in the Crew 2 on the last update was you can actually delete parts insanely easy by going over all of them and basically deleting a bunch of parts you didn't want. This was then not going to be in Motorfest on release either. They actually added this later on, that way you can then do it, which a lot of players are like, yo, we finally got this 6 months after it came out, even though this was already in the Crew 2, which was kind of a nice little feature to have. Deleting parts was quicker and I don't have to go through each one and then go through an animation to delete them. At least now we actually have that, which is dope. Also, they did end up separating the Street Tier 1 and the Tier 2 categories, which does of course mean two different parts for each vehicle. Why are they going to be together if no one's putting a level 600 part on the Street Tier 2? I also feel like that probably could have been a small thing they most likely could have fixed. And guys, the next thing I'm going to say right now is probably going to have a lot of controversy, but you know what, I have to say it. The Crew 2 summits were way better than Motorfest. They went backwards with them. A lot of people might be like, Block, what do you mean, bro? It's the same thing. Here's the thing, though, man. It isn't. For one, we all do know the entire summit is going to be put together for every single platform into one entire summit. Whereas the Crew 2 actually had PlayStation by itself, Xbox, and then PC. Now we actually have every single one together, which in return is less players going after the cars because they can't even get them. So at least having each summit separated for each platform was actually going to give a lot more players a chance to get the cars, and that way it's actually going to bring a lot more people into these said summits, and then they can go after the vehicles or like these special items in the summit itself, which I do feel like is a better way to do it. Like, why have the entire thing together? The other thing I have to mention though is, why did they take away every single summit thing to where it's basically going to be tied to like the playlist? Like, I understand that's the design of the game, but we all do know right now having special events in the summits are so much more fun, man. I actually like having a weird event in there to where you use a weird vehicle in an event that most likely doesn't make sense. But then again, having the entire playlist design how it is currently, which I would probably say I could most likely talk about that in an entirely separate video, they most likely could have had a lot more, I guess you could say variety in the level design to where every single vehicle can't do that said event for that said playlist. I just feel like, man, that would have been so much more fun. Also, the last thing is, every single event in that said playlist should give you some type of item for it, whether it's going to be 50,000 bucks, a few free gold parts, even throw in some random vanity items in there on top of like some extra XP bonuses, and just little things like that that make players go, you know what, bro, let me do these races so I can actually level up a tad faster. I don't have that vanity item, and then that way you can actually get a few items while doing the summit. Now, I do understand there's going to be like that timeline thing to where you complete a few events and you get rewarded with parts and stuff like that, but you know what, bro? It just isn't enough. Put stuff in every single event that would easily drag in a lot more people. Now, the one thing I do have to say though is I'm not saying Motorfest is going to be completely doomed because it did not have one more year of development. I just feel like if it did have one more year, it would have been way better than what it most likely was coming out last September compared to this one, where they could have easily added all of this stuff to it, had a really cool send-off of the Crew 2 into Motorfest for like a hype thing, most likely having a way bigger following for Motorfest, whereas the Crew 2 was going to be like it's been a great run. We are now moving over to the next big thing in the franchise, which of course is going to be Motorfest, and then boom, everybody would have been like, yo, this is going to be insane, 700 something cars on release or whatever, we have Toyota in there, hopefully we can actually get Lexus in the near future, that would be dope. But we're actually going to have a new game. We have 2 islands with a 3rd island actually being planned out, which they could have mentioned that one, which would have been even more insane. Like, imagine, guys, for a second, this game came out, let's say, in 2024, in technically September, which is going to be a few months from now. Let's say it came out in 2024 with both islands. What if they actually had a dope video of, like, the interview of it saying, yes, we are planning on a 3rd island next year for another thing of content, which we will be giving you more information on. Imagine for a second how crazy that would be, having 2 islands on release with a 3rd one guaranteed to be coming in it. Like, the overall hype for Motorfest, man, would have been absolutely insane. But I am curious on what you guys think about this though. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. Do you also agree that Motorfest probably should have had at least one more year in development? That way it probably could have had a lot of bugs, issues worked out, like for example the crew joining problems. We also could have had all the playlists being fixed with the challenges being bugged out. We also probably could have had more PvP events, maybe the summits could have been different. And then of course on top of that we would have had all the playlists in the game and also the entire map of Maui being onto Oahu from the release of the game coming out 1 year later. But the last thing I did want to mention though is I'm not saying Motorfest is doomed or anything like that, because we all do know everything can turn around and be better. I'm just saying though, if this game had one more year in development, it most likely would have been 100 times better when it came out, and they wouldn't have had to have different updates being added that should have been in there, and at least some of the features that the Crew 2 had when the last update came for that one, that we actually didn't get in Motorfest until 6 months later. Again, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below, and at this point, I don't think one more year would have hurt it that much.